Welcome to the Informatorium, because learning is fun. Today I'm going to talk about something that I intended to be part of an article for crack.com. This is a website I write for. But it didn't end up working out, so I thought it was such an interesting topic I would make a video about it. So what I discovered was that there was an interesting sort of subculture, I suppose you could call it, at the royal court of the French kings. And this was a group where gay men were free to basically live their lives more or less as they saw fit. Now, in order to understand how this was possible, we need to kind of take a look at kind of attitudes to homosexuality in the past. Now, as a word, it's only been around since the 1860s. Prior to that, it was discussed, obviously, as a sin by the church, but it was also kind of looked at almost like a disease. A sort of condition that the Italians were very prone to. I mean, that was the belief of some people at the time in Europe. So it was called the Italian condition. But the main thing was, it was defined as the physical act of anal sex with another man. And there were laws that were in place throughout Europe called sodomy laws. And there would be various punishments depending on where you were. So that kind of think that it would be rather surprising that there would be a group of gay men in those days. But it was possible for the following reasons. Basically, the royal court in France was one that was never completely free of threat. There was always the possibility that a rival family, or maybe within your own family, could stage an insurrection and would rise up against you and seize control. The French monarchy decided quite a while ago that if any member of their family displayed homosexual tendencies, they would ignore it, and that way, that member of the family would be neutralized as a threat. The reason being is that people would not follow such a person in an armed insurrection. They would be a sodomite, they would be a sinner, they would, even if they were able to seize control by force, which a lot of kings did in Europe over the years, they would probably need the blessing of the Pope, and which the Pope would obviously never give if it was well known that the man was a sodomite. So what we have is a small section of the king's younger brother. Every now and again, he is very well known in society at large as a homosexual. Now, the most prominent example I know of, that history talks about, and is a really notable example, is the Duc d'Orléans, the younger brother of Louis XIV. Now, the king's brother was always called Monsieur. It was just another little interesting tidbit that's worth mentioning. That was always his name at court. But basically, the reason we know so much about him is that his wife, obviously he had a wife for political reasons, she kept a very meticulous record of all his indiscretions and everyone else in the court because she was a bit of a gossip. The king, Louis XIV himself, even changed the law on sodomy, meaning that the courts would basically be dealing with it internally if it was ever came to light what was happening. It wouldn't be dealt by the law of the land, which is obviously much harsher. Obviously, the king had the final authority at court, so it basically wound up being that he was ignoring what his brother was doing. So obviously, this caused a bit of scandal in some circles. There was even talk that there was a gay fraternity of men who, among other things, would get together and have parties, and they would swear an oath that they would never have sex with a woman except for procreation. It's worth noting as well that Louis the Duc d'Orléans had children. He may have been, obviously he was gay, but he was also a pragmatist. He knew that if his king died, it would fall to him to take up the throne, and obviously there were alliances that need to be made in Europe as well. So he had children, obviously found a way to do that. But another really interesting thing about the Duc d'Orleans is he was one of the king's finest generals. And actually, a lot of people have sort of hypothesized that may have been another reason that the king didn't expose his brother, because he knew that he, whilst this served a purpose to kind of ignore what he was doing, also his brother was a very, very formidable fighter that he didn't want to upset in any way, shape or form. So yeah, like a really interesting chapter of history you don't usually hear about. You know, Monsieur made no secret of who he was at court at all. So it's amazing. You know, we hear this story of the past. It's a kind of a bleak one for a lot of minorities, with a lot of repression. And it's interesting to know there was this small pocket where people had a bit of freedom to be themselves, even if it was for political reasons. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, keep learning.